He held the woman who broke him, like he still couldn't let her go. Everyone would call it betrayal. But love doesn't always end, just because it's been broken. Before we dive in, welcome back to a space where love, truth, and emotion come alive. We're so glad you're here. If this story touches you, don't forget to comment your thoughts, share with someone who needs it, and subscribe for more. Now, let's begin. The Meridian Summit on Biotech Innovation was held every November at the Langham Hotel in Chicago. It was for pharmaceutical executives, research directors, patent attorneys, people who spoke in acronyms and thought in quarterly projections. Easton Merrill hated every second of it. He went anyway, because Merrill Biosciences had 3 active patent disputes, 2 pending acquisitions, and a keynote slot his PR team had been fighting for since February. He went with Gideon Walsh, his head of security, and his personal assistant, Claire, who kept his schedule with complete, humorless precision. On the second evening of the summit, Easton slipped away from a dinner he found professionally necessary and personally unbearable, and made his way to the hotel bar. He wanted 2 fingers of something quiet and 30 minutes without anyone asking him about the Hartley acquisition. The bar was full, every stool taken. Except one. He saw the woman's hand reach for it a half-second before he did. He stopped. She hadn't noticed him yet. She was already half-turned away, setting her bag down, tucking a loose lock behind her ear, with the kind of unconscious elegance that suggested she had absolutely no idea she was doing it. He let her have the stool and stepped back. "Thank you." She was looking at him now, dark eyes direct, with something amused behind them. She was beautiful in the way that registers before you've processed it consciously. He said nothing for a moment too long. "You're welcome," he managed. She tilted her head just slightly toward the pavement raised along the wall. "You were going to sit there?" "I was considering it." "You can have it back." "No. It looks better on you." She smiled. Not a polished smile, a real one with a little surprise. Like she hadn't expected that. He didn't walk away. He found a position on the raised platform at a corner and stayed there. He ordered his drink and told himself he wasn't watching her. He was watching her. Her name was Celine Addo. He learned it the following morning when he was absolutely engineering a reason to walk through the east wing of the conference floor at the same time the Fontaine Pharma delegation checked into their session. She was seated at the registration desk outside the room, organizing name badges with the focused efficiency of someone who was very good at being underestimated. Her locks were pinned up. She had a pen behind one ear. He stopped. "Bare stool," he said. She looked up, recognized him. That same slightly surprised smile. "Conference floor," she returned. "Easton Merrill." "I know who you are, Mr. Merrill." "Easton." "Celine Addo." "I know," he said. Then, because he wasn't entirely sure where that had come from, "Your badge." She glanced down at it. The corner of her mouth moved. Of course. It began the way these things do when neither person is trying, in the in-between moments that don't belong to anyone. They had coffee in the lobby the next morning. She was waiting for a courier. He had 20 minutes before his first panel. They spoke for 45. Claire appeared at his shoulder exactly once, received a look that conveyed absolutely nothing, and retreated. The day after that, he was in the back row of a session on regulatory pathways he had no business attending when he spotted her 3 rows ahead and to the left. She didn't see him, so he stayed for the entire session, waiting for her to turn her head. She didn't. She caught him the following evening at the welcome reception, standing at the edge of the room with a glass of wine he hadn't touched, oriented in a particular direction. "You're doing it again," she said. "Doing what?" "Lurking with purpose." I prefer strategic positioning. She laughed then, fully, genuinely. And he felt it like something physical. He thought, I would do anything to hear that again. He began rearranging things. Gideon noticed first, but said nothing, which was how Gideon communicated approval. Or at least tolerance. He simply adjusted, became aware of where Celine Addo was likely to be, and ensured that Easton's path occasionally intersected with those locations without announcement. Claire noticed second and said so directly. You cut your keynote speech by 11 minutes. It was running too long. It was running exactly on time. I timed it. You cut the closing framework entirely. Easton said nothing. Oh, Celine had left the room, Claire said, flatly, without inflection. She closed her tablet and walked away. Her boss, she had to accept, has become a hopeless romantic. He had, in fact, spotted Celine slip out the side door during his third slide, and had experienced a pull so irrational he'd barely resisted the urge to stop mid-sentence and follow her. He had compromised by speaking faster and cutting 11 minutes of material he'd spent 2 weeks preparing. He found her at the coffee cart in the lobby and acted thoroughly unsurprised to be there. She handed him a cup without being asked. You take it black. How did you? Bar. First night. You ordered. I watched. He stared at her. You noticed what I ordered. I notice things, she said simply, and moved toward the window with her own cup, and he followed her without thinking about it. The boat tour was his idea, which he would never fully admit to. She had mentioned somewhere between the third coffee and the second dinner that she had never done the Chicago Architecture River Cruise. Said it casually, but he filed it. 3 days later, he had 2 tickets and an excuse of Langham concierge recommending it for the evening. But she saw through the lie completely and accepted graciously without calling him out. They stood on the top deck in the November cold, and she had borrowed his jacket somewhere in the first 10 minutes without asking, and he had been intensely aware of it every minute since. He said something about the Tribune Tower, and she laughed so hard that she reached out and grabbed his arm to steady herself. Her hand stayed there. He covered it with his own without looking down, like it was the most natural thing in the world. They stood like that for a long time. You didn't have to do this, she said eventually. Do what? Any of this. The dinners. Tonight. He looked at her. I know, he said. I wanted to. She was quiet for a moment as the city moved past them. Easton. Celine. This is... I know what it is. And now, I think I can't do without you. She turned to look at him fully. And for a moment, everything stopped. The boat, the wind, the city, and there was only the particular way he was looking at her, steady and unhurried, like a man who had already made a decision. She didn't finish her sentence. He didn't ask her to. The boat moved on through the dark water, but they stayed exactly where they were. What Easton didn't know, what he couldn't have known, was that Dre Fontaine, her boss, had been watching? Not obsessively. He had simply noticed the way an opportunist always notices when something useful presents itself. He called Celine into his suite on the 11th day of the conference. She came, as she always came, because she had no real choice in the matter. The conversation was brief. His instructions were clear. She would access Easton's suite. She would locate the encrypted files on his laptop. Dre's technical team had given her everything she needed. She would copy and transmit. She would do this before the conference ended. And if she refused, she knows the consequence. She said nothing when he finished. She nodded and left. She walked to the elevator, pressed the button for her floor, and stared at her own reflection in the mirrored doors until they opened. The woman looking back at her looked very tired. She did it on the 13th evening. Easton had been pulled into an emergency board call at 9. a regulatory challenge in the EU that required his direct involvement. He'd texted her, "Tied up tonight. Sorry. Saving tomorrow for you." She'd read it 3 times. Then she'd gone. His suite was on the 14th floor. She had the keycard. She had arranged its acquisition with the mechanical efficiency of someone who had stopped letting herself feel things during the execution of a task. 20 minutes. In and out. The laptop was where she'd been told it would be. The transmission took 4 minutes. She was back in the elevator at 9:47. She went to her room, sat on the edge of her bed, and stared at the wall for a long time. Then she took a shower because she needed to do something with her hands. Their last 2 days were the ones that would stay with him longest. He didn't know they were the last. She did, and it made her both reckless and heartbroken in equal measure. She let herself have more than she should have, and stayed in his company longer than was wise. He told her many personal things about himself on the last night. Over dinner in a small Italian place, 3 blocks from the hotel, at a corner table he'd reserved specifically. About building a company from a single patent at 24. About the years he'd spent becoming something and forgetting. Somewhere in that process. Why he'd wanted to become it in the first place. It was obvious that he had opened up his heart to Celine Addo. She listened the way she always listened. Completely. Like there was no other room. "You've never told anyone that," she said when he finished. Not a question. "No." "Why me?" He looked at her for a moment. "Because when I'm talking to you, I forget to be careful." She looked down at her wine glass. He watched her throat move. "That's either a very good thing," she said quietly, "or a terrible one. I think it's the best thing that's happened to me in a long time." She looked up at him, and there it was again. That thing behind her eyes. He had been reading it as feeling. As possibility. He wasn't wrong. He just didn't know why it was underneath. The conference ended on a gray Friday morning. The lobby was a controlled chaos of departing guests, luggage carts, and business cards changing hands. He walked her to the car she'd arranged. He stood on the sidewalk with his hands in his coat pockets and looked at her with an expression he was doing very little to conceal. She had her bag over her shoulder and was already building herself back into someone who could drive away. "This doesn't have to be the end of it," he said. "Easton, I'll call you. When you're back in Atlanta and I'm back in Boston. We figure it out." She looked at him. For just a moment, her composure slipped. Something raw and real moved across her face. There and gone so quickly he almost missed it. "I'll call you," he said again, quietly, like a promise he was making to himself as much as to her. She nodded because she couldn't trust her voice. She got in the car, closed the door, and it moved. She didn't look back, which cost her more than she would ever tell anyone. He stood on the sidewalk and watched until the car turned the corner and disappeared. He stood there a moment longer. Gideon appeared at his shoulder. "Sir, give me a minute, Gideon." Gideon gave him a minute. He was back in his office at Merrill Biosciences on Monday morning. He had her number pulled up on his phone at 7 a.m. Closed it. Opened it again at noon. Closed it. Opened it at 8 p.m. and put the phone face down on his desk and did not pick it up again. He was being careful. Deliberate. He did not want to be too much, too fast. He was trying, for the first time in recent memory, not to move at the speed of someone who was used to getting what he wanted. Gideon came into his office on Thursday morning and closed the door behind him. This was not normal. Gideon did not close doors for administrative matters. He put a folder on the desk. The Helios files. Easton looked at the folder. Helios was the internal code name for their most sensitive active patent. A proprietary compound in late-stage trials that represented 6 years and $340 million of research and development. The compound that would redefine Merrill Bioscience's market position for the next decade. What about them? Accessed and transmitted remotely. Wednesday, November 14th, 9:17 p.m. to 9:41 p.m. Easton did not move. From where? Your conference suite, sir. Langham, Chicago. The transmission was encrypted and routed through 3 proxies. It took our team 48 hours to trace it. Easton looked at the folder for a long time without opening it. Outside of hotel staff, only one keycard had access to that suite. Gideon said quietly. The room was very still. Easton sat back in his chair and looked at the window. At the harbor below, boats cutting through the cold water. He thought about a bar stool, a boat on the Chicago River, a corner table at an Italian restaurant. The way she'd said, "Because when you're talking to me, you forget to be careful." He pressed 2 fingers to his mouth and sat very still, the way a man sits when something is breaking in a place he didn't know could break. His jaw was tight. 1 tear formed at the corner of his right eye, but he caught it before it fell, almost angry at it. He pressed his thumb against the bridge of his nose and breathed. He had her number pulled up on his phone. He'd been about to call her. He set the phone face down. Then he straightened, rolled his shoulders, closed the folder. Find her, he said. Gideon left the office without another word. And for the first time in as long as he could remember, Easton Merrill sat completely alone in a room he'd built and felt absolutely nothing of what it was supposed to mean. He looked at the window and thought about every moment of those 14 days with a new and terrible lens. Was any of it real? Had she been performing? Every dinner, every laugh, every quiet moment on the deck of that boat? Had she been counting down to that Wednesday evening from the very beginning? What he hadn't said, what he couldn't say to anyone in that room, was that finding her was the only thing he'd wanted to do since the moment she drove away from that curb in Chicago. The irony of that sat in him like a stone. Gideon found her in 48 hours. She was still in Atlanta, still working the Fontaine Pharma satellite office on Peachtree Street. Easton flew down on Saturday morning. He told no one the reason. He did not involve the legal team. He did not file anything with the authorities. He was not, he told himself, doing this for the company. He was doing this because he needed to hear it from her. She was brought to a private conference room in a building Gideon used for sensitive matters. Not a police precinct. Not a boardroom. Something neutral and private. Because whatever was about to happen, it was not going to be witnessed. Easton was at the window when she was brought in. He had his back to the door. He kept it there for a moment, long enough to ensure that what was on his face was something manageable before she saw it. When he turned, she was standing near the door, completely still, her hands at her sides. She looked at him with something he couldn't immediately categorize. Not guilt. Not defiance. Something more complicated and more painful than either. He looked at her for a long moment. Whatever he had prepared to say, whatever cold and precise opening he'd constructed in his head on the flight down, left him completely. "I thought we had something," he said. His voice was quiet, controlled, only barely. She said nothing. "I thought you felt the same way. I had your number pulled up many times after I got home. Many times. Did you know that? I kept—" He stopped, looked away, looked back. "I was going to call you. I was being careful because I didn't want to be too much. I was trying to give you space. And the whole time," he exhaled, "was any of it real? Any of it at all? The boat, the dinners, all those hours we spent. Was that just the job? Was I a mark, Celine? Just tell me. Please. Tell me it was a job and I was a fool, and none of it meant anything. At least give me that much. She was looking at him. Her eyes were full. Not spilling, but full, like someone holding still in very deep water. Her jaw was set. Her mouth was closed. Celine. The word came out differently than he intended. Lower. More broken. I can't explain, she said. Her voice was barely there. Please don't ask me to. He stared at her. The silence stretched. That's it? That's all you have to say to me? She didn't look away. She didn't flinch. And she didn't speak. He read it as guilt, as confirmation, as a woman who had gotten what she needed and had nothing left to offer the man she'd taken it from. He told her his legal team would be in touch and turned toward the door. He had his hand on the frame when he stopped. He stood there for a moment without turning around. Her eyes when he'd asked if any of it was real. The way they'd filled and stayed full while she held perfectly still. That wasn't how someone looked when they'd been caught. That wasn't guilt. That was someone being crushed under something they couldn't lift. Or that was just his emotion. His heart, unfortunately, could still not let go. He got into the elevator, took out his phone, and called Gideon. Don't file anything yet. Investigate further. I want everything on her. Before Chicago, before Fontaine, before Atlanta. Everything. It took 10 days. Gideon was thorough in the way that only people who have worked in intelligence are thorough. Not just gathering information, but understanding what the information means and what it doesn't. What he assembled piece by piece was not a profile of a corporate spy. It was the portrait of a woman who had been swallowed. Celine Addo, 29, from Atlanta. Degree in Business Administration from Spelman College. 5 years of legitimate executive assistant work at 2 reputable firms. Clean record. Excellent references. 2 years ago, a job listing for an executive assistant position with a pharmaceutical consultancy based in Atlanta. A subsidiary, buried 3 levels deep in the Fontaine corporate structure. The offer had been generous. Legitimate looking. Her sister, Amara, 24, had seen the same listing and applied alongside her. They'd been hired together. What they found was not what had been advertised. Passports held within the first week. For safekeeping during onboarding, they were told. Housing provided. Controlled. Movement monitored. Communication managed. Compliance purchased through the most reliable currency available. Someone they loved. Amara had been separated from Celine within the first month and transferred to a separate location in the city. Celine had been told it was a different assignment. She'd been allowed occasional contact, carefully staged voice messages, photographs, proof of life that had been, Gideon's team would confirm, manufactured. Amara Addo had been dead for 14 months. A medical emergency. Treatable, if treatment had been sought. It had not been. The death had been covered up. A forged record. A fabricated paper trail. For 14 months, Celine had been protecting a ghost, complying with every instruction, absorbing every humiliation, going to Chicago, and doing what she was told to do to a man she had genuinely, catastrophically, come to care for. All to keep safe a sister who had already been gone for over a year. Gideon put the full report on Easton's desk at 11:45 on a Thursday night. Easton was still in the office. He often was. He read every page. He read them twice. When he finished, he closed the folder, sat back in his chair, and looked at the ceiling. His assistant knocked at midnight, saw the lights still on, and opened the door. Sir? Easton was still looking at the ceiling. She has no idea. Claire waited. She's been protecting her for 14 months. But Amara's been dead for 14 months and she has no idea. And she has been... He stopped. He stood up from his desk and walked to the window. Get me, Gideon. Easton Merrill did not do anything quietly. It was not in his nature. But the operation he launched in the 72 hours following that Thursday night was something different. Precise, controlled, and entirely invisible to anyone who wasn't meant to see it. He brought in his legal network. A private investigative firm with 2 former DOJ attorneys on staff. He made 3 phone calls to federal contacts he had never once called in a personal favor from. Until now. He built 2 cases simultaneously. The patent theft, because it needed to be airtight, and because it was real. And the trafficking operation, which he separated entirely because he needed both charges to land completely. And he needed Dre Fontaine to go away for a very long time. He did all of it without telling Celine. She didn't know his name was behind any of it. He was not doing it to be known. He was doing it because she was in danger every day the operation remained intact. Because a woman he had watched order coffee and laugh on a boat, and hold still while her heart broke in a room in Atlanta, deserved to be free, and because Easton Merrill, whatever else could be said about him, did not leave people he loved behind. The operation took 6 weeks. On a Tuesday morning in January, Dre Fontaine's operations were dismantled simultaneously across 3 cities. Offices raided, accounts frozen, personnel in handcuffs. A sealed federal indictment on trafficking charges that Gideon's team had built with the kind of care that leaves no room for appeal. Celine was extracted safely before any of it went public, brought to a neutral location, a private residence in Buckhead that Easton had arranged. She was told only that she was safe, that it was over, that she was free. She sat in the kitchen of that house for a long time and didn't quite believe it. The first thing she asked the personnel was if she could go see her sister, but she was told to hold on. Before federal agents moved Dre Fontaine to processing, Easton requested 5 minutes with him. His attorneys advised against it. Strongly, formally, in writing. He went anyway. They hadn't been in the same room since a conference 18 months ago, when they'd been professionally cordial in the way of men who no longer trusted each other. Before that, before everything, they had shared a dorm room at MIT for 2 years. They had shaken hands in a parking garage in Cambridge when they thought they were about to build something that would matter. Dre was seated when Easton came in. He was smirking, controlled in the posture of a man who believed he still had moves to make. Easton stood across from him and took his time looking at the man he had once called his closest friend. "I can't believe you went from hate and envy to buying a human being." Dre's smirk faded. Slightly. "You purchased a woman's freedom and used her sister's life as a leash. You kept her in a grief she didn't even know was real because it made her easier to control. You took something genuine, feelings that had nothing to do with you or your patents or your wounded pride, and you put it to work for you like it was a resource to be extracted." Easton leaned down, both hands flat on the table between them, until they were eye level. "I am not here about the Helios files, Dre. My company will recover. We always do." He held the gaze for a long moment. "I'm here because I want you to understand something very clearly. The one you used to try to destroy me. She is the reason you are finished. Not the federal indictment. Her. Because I found out what you did to her, and I decided that no version of the future where you continue to exist was acceptable to me." He straightened and picked up his jacket from the back of the chair. "I hope prison life gives you time to sit with that." He walked out without looking back. He came to her himself, to a house in Buckhead, where a woman he loved was sitting in a kitchen, not quite believing she was free. She heard the door and stood. When he walked into the kitchen, she went very still. He stopped a few feet away. He looked at her, the way he had looked at her across that hotel bar on the first night, like she was the most interesting thing in any room she occupied. "I'm so sorry, Easton. I didn't mean to hurt you. I was just Celine, I know I hurt you so badly. Come here. He pulled her into a hug and whispered in her ears. You can never hurt me, Celine. I know you didn't mean to. She sobbed. I owe you the truth, he said after a while. About what I found. About Amara. Something moved across her face. He told her everything, carefully and completely. He watched her process it in stages. The confusion first, the resistance, the slow, terrible comprehension beginning to form. When he said Amara's name in the context of what Gideon had found, Celine's face changed. Her lips parted. She shook her head once. The small, involuntary movement of someone receiving a blow they saw coming but couldn't stop. She's been 14 months, he said gently. The sound she made was not a word. It was the sound of something structural giving way. He crossed the room in 3 steps and pulled her in. Arms completely around her, one hand at the back of her head, holding her the way you hold something precious that is also falling apart. He held her against his chest like he was the only solid thing available, and had decided to be as solid as possible. I've got you, he said into her hair. I've got you. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. She cried for a long time. He didn't move. He just held her with everything he had, one hand making slow circles at her back, the other pressed to the back of her head like he was keeping her together by sheer will. When she finally quieted, not better, not okay, but quieter, he still didn't let go. She's been gone for 14 months, Celine said. Her voice was wrecked. And I've been... I know. All of it. Everything I did it for... I know, Celine. He pulled back just enough to look at her. Her face was undone. He held it in his hands anyway. None of what you did was your fault. Not one single piece of it. Do you hear me? She shook her head, not disagreeing, just overwhelmed. I thought you didn't feel anything, he said quietly. In that room in Atlanta. When I felt everything, she said. I felt every word you said, and I couldn't. There was nothing I could say. If I told you, they had ways to know. And if they knew? She was already gone, but I didn't know that. I know you didn't. He pressed his forehead to hers. A long, still moment. The files, Celine. Stop. He looked at her. Don't apologize anymore. Not for a single thing. She looked back at him. For the first time in a long time, she let someone look at her without looking away. It's been 6 months of blissful and beautiful relationship between Easton and Celine. The restaurant he reserved was called Maison on 5th. It was in Atlanta, 12 blocks from Spelman, and she had mentioned it once in passing, during a dinner in Chicago that had run 3 hours too long. She had read about it somewhere, she'd said. Never been. One of those places you always mean to get to. He had remembered. Of course he had. Their table was in the corner, in this restaurant that made people lean in toward each other, without realizing they were doing it. She reached across the table for his hand somewhere in the middle of a sentence. The same instinct she'd had on the boat. Unthinking, natural, like reaching for something that was simply hers. He turned his hand over and held hers. He did not let go. She was mid-sentence when she felt him reach into his jacket pocket with his free hand. She lost the thread of what she was saying. He set something on the table between them without opening it. A small dark box, velvet, sitting there with the patient confidence of something that had been decided a long time ago. She stopped breathing for a moment. I had something prepared, he said. His voice was low, slightly undone at the edges, which she had come to understand was what he looked like when something mattered enormously to him. Something eloquent. Gideon helped me practice it, She laughed despite herself. The full, real laugh, the one he had rearranged conference schedules to hear. And her eyes filled at the same time. But all I actually want to say is... He opened the box. A ring. A diamond at its center. Warm and unhurried, surrounded by a ring of smaller stones. Simple. Perfect. Like it had been designed specifically for a woman who didn't need anything loud to know that something was real. I found you twice, he said. I am not losing you again. She was already crying. She was already nodding. He kept going anyway, because he had prepared it, and he was going to say it. Celine Addo, will you please let me spend the rest of my life being completely obvious about how I feel about you? She laughed again through the tears. You were never subtle, she managed. No, he agreed, smiling. I really wasn't. He slid the ring onto her finger. She looked down at it. Then she looked up at him. He stood up from his chair, leaned across the corner of the table, and kissed her. Slow and certain and completely unhurried. In the middle of a restaurant full of strangers who went very quiet in the best possible way. Someone nearby said softly, "Oh." Someone else started clapping. It spread the way these things do when a room full of strangers recognizes something true. When they broke apart, she was smiling the way she had smiled at him at a bar in Chicago, when he'd said something unexpected and she hadn't meant to be charmed. Completely. Without armor. I love you, she said. I love you, he said back. Like it was the simplest fact in the world. Around them, the room settled back into its Wednesday evening warmth. A waiter appeared with fresh glasses of wine and the quiet discretion of someone who understood the assignment. Celine looked down at her hand. The ring caught the light. You remembered the restaurant. You mentioned it once. That was months ago. I know. She shook her head slowly. Not in disbelief. In the particular wonder of someone understanding, perhaps for the first time, what it actually felt like to be truly, quietly, stubbornly loved. You're a lot, Easton Merrill. I know that too. He reached across and tucked a strand of her hair back. The same gesture she used to make herself, unconsciously, at a bar stool in Chicago on a night that had changed everything. Is it okay? She looked at him. This man who had moved mountains and dismantled empires and flown across the country and held her through the worst night of her life, and remembered a restaurant she'd mentioned once in a sentence she hadn't even finished. Yeah, she said. It's more than okay.